My son whispered, "Don't open the door." But I already did. I want to take you to that moment, not slowly, right there, right into it. It is 12:17 in the morning. I am standing in the hallway of my house in my dressing gown, with the front door open in front of me and the cold night air coming in, and the porch light throwing its yellow circle onto an empty step. Nobody there. I had heard knocking, 3 knocks, deliberate, evenly spaced, the kind of knocking that is not accidental, not a branch against a window or a cat on the roof or any of the things you tell yourself at midnight when the alternative is that someone was actually there. 3 knocks. I had come downstairs, I had opened the door, and there was nothing on the other side of it except cold air and the dark street and my own heartbeat getting louder. And then my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. It was past midnight and I did not recognize the number, and every instinct said, do not stand in an open doorway at midnight and answer an unknown call, because the accumulation of those things together is the beginning of something you do not want to be in. But I answered it because some other instinct, the one that has no rational explanation but has never in my experience been wrong, some other instinct said, answer it. My son's voice. Not calm, not the voice he uses when he is calling to check in or ask a question or tell me something ordinary. The voice he used when he was 7 years old and fell from a tree, and I heard him scream from inside the house and knew before I reached the garden that something was badly wrong. That voice, stripped of everything except its essential urgency. He said, "Mom, I'm outside. I'm at the gate. I've been trying to reach you. Who did you just let in?" I turned around. The hallway behind me was dark, the way hallways are dark at midnight when you have walked through them toward a door and not thought to turn on lights because you expected to open the door and close it again in 30 seconds and go back to bed. I had left the lamp on in the sitting room. Its light was coming through the gap in the door, a thin strip of warm yellow in all of that dark, and the dark between me and that strip of light was a hallway, my hallway, with the coat rack on the left and the table on the right and the stairs at the end that I have walked up and down 10,000 times. But I had opened the door, and now I could not be certain what had come in while I was looking at the empty porch. My son's voice in my ear again. "Mom, answer me. Are you alone?" If you are listening to this right now, I need you to stay with me. Not because this is a ghost story. I will tell you right now clearly, before we go any further, I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in people. I believe in what people are capable of, the good of it and the darkness of it. And I believe that the most frightening things in this world wear human faces and come with rational explanations that are in some ways more disturbing than the supernatural alternative. What happened in my house that night and in the weeks that followed was not a haunting. It was something considerably more human than that, and considerably more deliberate. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now. Are you home? Is it late? Is the house quiet in the particular way that makes you more aware of every sound? I read every comment, every one, because this story belongs to anyone who has ever been in a situation where the most dangerous thing was the thing they couldn't see. Stay with me. Every word matters. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Miriam Ashford. I am 62 years old. I have lived in the same house for 27 years, a semi-detached Victorian on a residential street in a city that I will not name precisely, in a neighborhood that was modest when we moved in and has since become what estate agents call desirable, which means that the same houses that we bought for ordinary prices now cost more than ordinary salaries can reach, and the neighbors have changed gradually from people like us to people who are not quite like us, though I try not to make too much of that distinction because people are people, and I believe in extending good faith until there is a reason not to. My husband, Gerald, died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end, the way that particular cancer tends to go, with a speed that does not allow for any of the adjustment that slower illnesses sometimes provide. Gerald was a secondary school science teacher for 31 years. He was methodical and kind and had a gift for explaining difficult things simply that I suspect was the quality my son inherited and that I have spent many years being grateful for in both of them. The house after Gerald was a different house. Not a bad house. I have not been unhappy here, but a house with a different quality of silence than the silence that existed when it was full. My son's name is Owen. He is 34. He lives 20 minutes away, close enough that he comes for Sunday dinner most weeks, far enough that he has his own life, which is the correct geography for an adult child and their parent, and I am grateful we landed on it. Owen is a software security consultant. He finds vulnerabilities in systems for a living. Companies hire him to try to break their defenses so that the people who would break them with malicious intent cannot. It requires, he has explained to me many times, a specific way of thinking, not the way of someone trying to protect a system, but the way of someone trying to breach it. You have to think like the threat. He has been doing this for 9 years, and he is, by the assessment of his employers and clients, very good at it. This becomes relevant. Owen had been concerned about my house security for some time before the events of that night. Not obsessively. He did not alarm me with specific fears. He did not create anxiety where there was none. But in the quiet, practical way of someone whose professional habit is threat assessment, he had been making suggestions. A security camera at the front door, better locks on the ground floor windows, a door chain that required conscious engagement before the door could be opened more than a few centimeters. I had installed some of these things in the way that you do when someone you love asks you to do something for reasons of their own peace of mind, as much as genuine necessity. I had installed them and I had not thought about them very much. The camera was there the night I opened the door. It had been there for 7 months, and I had not looked at it properly in 7 months, which is the thing about security equipment that nobody tells you. Having it and using it are different habits, and most people develop the first without ever fully developing the second. There was another thing Owen had told me about the street. He had told me this 4 months before the midnight knocking in a conversation I had listened to and filed in the way that you file information that seems relevant but distant, real but not yet urgent. He had told me that there had been reports in the neighborhood, not break-ins, not anything the police had classified as crimes yet, but reports from neighbors, 2 of them that he knew of, possibly more, of the same thing, a knock at the door late at night. Nobody visible when the door was opened, the sense, in at least one case, that someone had been in or near the house without any evidence of forced entry. One neighbor, a retired man named Arthur who lived 4 doors down and who Owen had spoken to at some point, Arthur had mentioned that he had found a ground floor window unlatched that he was certain he had latched. He had mentioned it to the police. They had noted it. Nothing further had developed. I had listened to Owen tell me this. I had thought, that is concerning. I had not changed my behavior. This is one of the things I find most human about the situation and most honest. The information was available. The pattern was visible. I simply had not reached the threshold of believing that the pattern was for me. 4 months later, at 12:17 in the morning, I opened my front door. I need to take you through that night in detail because the details are what make the picture, and the picture is what I needed, what Owen needed to understand what we were actually dealing with. I had gone to bed at around 10:30, a normal night. I had read for 40 minutes. I have been reading my way through a history of the Roman Empire in weekly installments for the better part of a year, which is not moving quickly, but is moving, which I consider a reasonable pace for both the Roman Empire and myself. I had turned the light off at 11:15. I was asleep within 20 minutes. The knocking woke me at 12:09. I know the time because I looked at my phone when the sound reached me. The first thing you do when you are woken unexpectedly in the night is look at the time, as though the time will tell you something about the nature of the disturbance. 3 knocks. Not frantic, not soft, deliberate, the kind of knocking that expects to be answered. My first thought was Owen. My second thought was that Owen would call before arriving at midnight, and that if he hadn't called, it was because something had happened that prevented calling, which meant I needed to get to the door. These two thoughts happened in under 4 seconds and produced the action of getting up, putting on my dressing gown, walking downstairs, and opening the front door. I did not put the hallway light on. I did not engage the chain. I did not check the security camera feed on my phone. The app was there. I could have looked at it in 10 seconds. I did not do it because I was half awake and concerned and moving on autopilot of someone who has opened that door 10,000 times and has never needed to be cautious. This is the gap between having security measures and having security habits, and it is the gap that everything else came through. The porch was empty. I stood for a moment looking at the empty step, at the dark path beyond it, at the gate at the end of the path, which was, I noted this without fully processing it at the time, standing slightly open. I had closed it when I came in that afternoon. I was certain of that because I always close it. It is a habit. The gate swings inward. You pull it behind you when you come through. I have done it for 27 years. It was open. My phone rang. Owen's voice, the stripped down, urgent voice. "I'm outside. I've been trying to reach you. Who did you just let in?" He was at the gate. He was coming up the path as I processed what he was saying. I could see him, the dark shape of him moving fast. He came to me on the doorstep and he looked at me first, the parental inventory, checking that I was present and intact, and then he looked past me into the dark hallway. He said, "Go to the kitchen, turn all the lights on, call 999 and tell them you need a patrol car. I'll be right behind you. Don't stop moving." I said, "Owen, what?" He said, "Mom, please, go." I went. I turned the lights on. I called, and Owen went through my house, every room, methodically, the way someone who thinks like a threat would search a space, opening doors, checking closets, looking in the specific places that someone with intent would use. It took him 11 minutes. He came back to the kitchen and he said, "Clear." And then he sat down at my kitchen table and he put his head in his hands for a moment, and when he looked up, his face had the expression of someone who has been frightened and now managing the aftermath. I said, "Tell me everything." He said, "I will, but first show me what the camera recorded." The camera was there. The app was on my phone. 7 months of my walking past it and registering it vaguely and never once opening the footage. We opened it now. Owen sat beside me at the kitchen table and we scrolled back to 12:09, and we watched. The footage was better than I expected. Owen had selected the camera specifically for its night vision capability, which was his professional habit applied to a domestic context, and the picture was clear enough for our purposes. 12:09. The porch in gray-green night vision. A figure approaching the door, walking up the path from the gate. Not running, walking, the specific unhurried walk of someone who has been here before and knows the layout and is not concerned about being seen. The figure reached the door, 3 knocks, and then, this is the part that I have watched many times since and that still produces the same response in me, the figure did not step back and wait. The figure stepped to the side, moved out of the camera's direct angle, not off the porch. Owen pointed this out to me quietly, his voice very steady, not off the porch, but to the edge of it, where the angle of the camera would not catch them clearly. They knew where the camera was. They knew its range. I said, "They knew about the camera." Owen said, "They've been watching the house long enough to know the camera placement." The footage continued. 12:12, 3 minutes after the knock. My front door opening. The camera caught the edge of it, the door swinging inward, the hallway light not coming on, me at the threshold, looking at an empty porch, and the figure, visible in the peripheral edge of the frame for 1 second, 2 at most, moving, not going, moving inward, past me, into the house. I had thought the porch was empty because I had looked forward. The figure had been to my side, and while I stood there looking at an empty step, they had walked past me into my hallway. I watched this for a long time. Owen let me watch it for as long as I needed. Then I said, "How long has this been happening?" He said, "I don't know exactly. I know it started on this street at least 5 months ago. I know Arthur isn't the only one. I've been talking to people quietly without alarming anyone, and there are at least 4 households on this street where something similar has happened. A knock late at night, an open window, the feeling that something is wrong without visible evidence of it." I said, "Why?" He said, "That's what I've been trying to figure out, and I think I know, but I need to show you something first." He pulled out his laptop. He had been carrying it. He had it in a bag when he arrived, which meant he had not come from home on impulse, which meant there was something he had already decided he needed to show me. I said, "Why were you coming here at midnight?" He said, "Because I found something today that I didn't want to tell you on the phone, and I was trying to decide how to tell you. And then I saw the camera notification on my phone. I have the feed set up on my phone too. I set it up when I installed it, and I saw someone at your door and you opening it, and I ran." He opened the laptop. He said, "Mom, how much do you know about what's happening to the houses on this street?" Act 4. The pattern, 29 to 38 minutes. Owen had been investigating for 6 weeks. Not officially. He had no official capacity here. This was not a client engagement. This was a son applying his professional skills to a problem that was becoming personal. He had started with Arthur's report. He had spoken to other neighbors. He had looked at the street sale history, the planning applications, the ownership records, the specific documentary trail that a street accumulates over time, and that most people never look at because why would you? The street is simply there. It exists. It does not seem like something that requires investigation. He had found something in those records. In the past 18 months, 3 properties on our street had sold. Not unusual in itself, properties sell, but Owen, who thinks like a threat, had looked at who bought them. The 3 properties had been purchased through 3 different companies, different names, different registered addresses, different apparent identities. But Owen, who finds vulnerabilities in systems for a living, had pulled at threads. Behind the 3 different entities were common threads: shared legal representation, overlapping director names buried in subsidiary documents, the specific pattern of entities that are designed to appear unrelated but have been constructed by the same hands. He had traced those hands to a property development consortium, not a well-known one, not the kind of name that appears in news articles or annual reports or anywhere that a reasonable person would encounter it, the kind of entity that exists in the specific shadow territory of legitimate business and deliberate opacity. A consortium that in the past 4 years had quietly acquired significant holdings in several streets in this city through a pattern of patient, methodical purchase. The strategy, Owen explained this to me in the careful, methodical way of someone who has been building toward a conclusion and wants to make sure the foundation is understood before the conclusion is reached. The strategy was something that had been documented in other cities, in other contexts, though it was not widely known. The consortium identified streets that were positioned for significant value increase, older housing stock in areas that were gentrifying, with the specific combination of location and property type that meant values were going to rise substantially within a foreseeable window. They began to acquire properties when they came available, and for the properties that were not available, the ones with long-term owners, the ones with people like me who had lived in their houses for 27 years and had no particular intention of selling, they accelerated the availability. Not through anything overtly criminal, not through anything that would be easy to prove, through the patient, methodical application of pressure that was designed to make people feel unsafe, to make long-term residents question whether their home was still the place they thought it was, to create the particular anxiety of someone who no longer feels secure in their own space and begins to think, perhaps for the first time, that selling and going somewhere else might be the relief they need. The late-night knocking, the opened windows, the sense of being watched, the feeling that the house has been entered, experienced by people who found no evidence of forced entry because the entry had not required force, it had required knowledge of the properties, access that had been quietly arranged, and the deliberate, sustained campaign of making people feel that their homes were permeable, that they could not keep the outside out. Arthur was considering selling. Owen knew this because he had spoken to Arthur. 2 other neighbors had already left in the past 3 months, not in direct response to the incidents, they would have said, but in the particular way that people leave when the accumulation of small discomforts has tipped a scale without them quite identifying the tipping point. And my house was... Owen showed me on a map he had made, a quiet and thorough map built from public records and corporate registries and the specific kind of research that most people do not know how to do. My house was one of 4 remaining long-term owner-occupied properties on the street that the consortium did not yet own, one of the holdouts, one of the obstacles. I had lived in this house for 27 years. Gerald and I had chosen it together, painted it together, argued about the kitchen layout and made peace over the garden, and raised Owen in it from the age of 7. Gerald had died in the bedroom upstairs. I had sat with him there, at the end, and held his hand, and the house had held us both. This house was not a property asset. It was the accumulated physical form of a life. It was the walls that had been inside every ordinary and extraordinary moment of the last 27 years. And someone had decided that it was an obstacle. Someone had come to my door at midnight and walked past me in my own hallway. Not to take anything, not to damage anything, to let me know, in the way that does not leave evidence, in the way that a person who has not done enough yet to be criminal can still do, to let me know that my home was not the fortress I thought it was, that I was not as safe as I believed, that the outside could come in. I sat with this information for a long time, and then I said to my son, "Tell me what we are going to do about it." Owen had not come to me that night only with information. He had come with a plan. This is who Owen is, not a person who identifies a problem and presents it and then waits to see what happens, a person who identifies a problem and has already been constructing the response while the identification is still being processed. It is his professional character, and it is also, I think, his character as my son. The specific protectiveness of a child who lost one parent and is not prepared to let the circumstances of the world threaten the other without doing everything in his power to prevent it. The plan had several components. I will tell you all of them because I think all of them matter. The first was documentation. Owen had been documenting for 6 weeks, but the footage from that night was the first concrete, time-stamped visual evidence of an actual incursion. He preserved it immediately, backed up in multiple locations, copied to a secure server, sent to a legal contact he had already briefed. The figure in the footage was not clearly identifiable. The camera angle, the positioning they had deliberately used, the dark clothing. But the footage established the reality of what was happening in a way that could not be dismissed as the anxiety of an older woman living alone. It was real. It was recorded. It was time-stamped. The second component was the neighbors. Owen had been quietly building relations on the street for 6 weeks, but after that night, he moved from quiet to coordinated. He spoke to Arthur. He spoke to the Hendersons at number 14 and the O'Coffer family at number 22 and the retired teacher at the end of the road whose name is Patricia and who had, it turned out, been keeping her own notes about strange occurrences for 4 months without knowing what to do with them. He gathered the notes, he gathered the accounts, he constructed a documented pattern that no individual account could have produced, but that together formed something much harder to dismiss. The third component was the legal channel. Brendan, Owen's friend from university, who was now a solicitor, Brendan had been briefed and had been identifying the relevant legal framework. What was being done was not straightforwardly criminal in ways that had been prosecuted before. It lived in the specific gray territory of pressure campaigns designed to stay below the threshold of provable crime. But Brendan had found precedents, cases in other jurisdictions where similar tactics had been pursued and where the pattern of behavior, documented sufficiently, had crossed into tortuous conduct, harassment, in some cases criminal conspiracy. He was building a case. Owen's documentation was his material. The fourth component was exposure, and this is the part I want to tell you about carefully because it is the part that required the most from both of us, from Owen in terms of skill, and from me in terms of something I will call, for lack of a better word, bravery, though I am not sure that is the accurate word for choosing to stay in your own house and refuse to be made to feel that you cannot. Owen reconfigured my security system entirely in the week following that night. Not just the camera, everything. Cameras covering angles that had not been covered before, including the angle the figure had used to avoid detection, motion sensors, a door system that required deliberate two-step engagement before it could be opened from the inside. Locks that were, as he put it, considerably less interesting to anyone with a bump key than the ones I had previously been relying on. He did this without fuss and without making me feel that my home had become a fortress. He made it feel, instead, like a house that knew itself, that was aware of its own perimeter. And then he set up something else, a monitoring system that he could access remotely, the feeds, the sensors, all of it, that would alert him to any activity at the property in real time. He said, "I'm not going to be sitting outside your house every night, but I'm going to know the second anything moves, and I'm going to be here inside 7 minutes." I said, 7 minutes is a long time. He said, which is why the door system is now going to keep you very well separated from whatever is on the other side of it before those 7 minutes are up. The fifth component was me. What I decided to do once I had the full picture and the full plan was the thing that I think surprised Owen the most. He had expected, I could tell from the way he had framed the conversation, the care with which he had managed my potential distress, he had expected that I would want to leave, that the combination of information and experience would finally tip whatever scale was being pushed towards selling, that I would say, enough, I am 62, Gerald is gone, I do not need to fight this battle. I said, I am not leaving my house. He looked at me. I said, Gerald and I chose this house. We built our life in it. He died in it. You grew up in it. I am not going to be walked out of it by people who knocked on my door at midnight and assumed that a woman living alone could be frightened into selling. That assumption is wrong, and I would like to demonstrate that it is wrong clearly and completely and in a way that is documented. Owen looked at me for a moment, and then he smiled, the specific smile that I know as his real smile, the one that is not performed for anyone, the one that has been the same since he was 7 years old. He said, "Okay, Mom." He said, "Let's demonstrate it." What followed took 4 months. I will not pretend they were 4 comfortable months. There were nights that were harder than others, moments when the house felt less like a home than a position I was holding, and I will not romanticize that. Holding a position costs something. I knew what it was costing, and I chose to pay it, but I am not going to dress it up as something that didn't require sustained effort and occasional fear. But here is what happened in those 4 months. 3 weeks after that night, Owen's reconfigured cameras caught a figure in the back garden at 2 in the morning. Not inside the house. The new systems had made the house itself considerably less accessible, but in the garden, which is still my property and which was still being used as a space for pressure. The footage was clear. The figure was not perfectly identifiable, but Owen's professional skills included the specific area of digital image analysis, and what he could extract from the footage, combined with other documentation he had been compiling, was enough to give Brendan something to work with. 6 weeks in, Patricia at the end of the road had a different experience from all the others. Someone who came to her door in daylight, presenting as a property agent, asking if she had considered selling, and offering to arrange a valuation. She had the presence of mind to ask for a business card and to say she would think about it. The business card was a thread. Owen pulled it. It led, not directly, not cleanly, but through the specific chain of entities he had already been mapping, back to the consortium. That connection, documented, was what Brendan needed to move the case from the territory of concerning pattern to the territory of actionable conspiracy. There is a meaningful legal difference between several unconnected, unpleasant things happening on a street and several things happening on a street that can be connected to a single coordinated source with a documented motive and a documented method. Brendan had been building toward that difference. He had it now. The case was filed. I will not walk you through the legal proceedings in detail because they are ongoing and because the law moves at its own pace regardless of how urgently the people inside it would like it to move faster. What I will tell you is that the filing itself had an effect. The pattern of incidents on the street stopped, not gradually, stopped. The midnight knocking stopped, the open windows stopped, the figure in the garden did not return. Pressure campaigns of this kind depend on the target not knowing what is happening or not having the means to respond. Once it was clear that the target knew exactly what was happening and had built a documented, legally actionable response, the calculation changed. Arthur did not sell. He told Owen that knowing the explanation had paradoxically made him feel more secure than the previous months of unexplained anxiety, that a named, identifiable threat was less frightening than a nameless, inexplicable one. I think this is true. The darkness at the end of the hallway was frightening. What was actually in it, though serious, though real, was also something I could look at and name and decide not to be defeated by. The 4 remaining long-term owners on the street are all still there. I want to tell you that simply and clearly. We are all still there. Owen comes for Sunday dinner most weeks. He comes through the front door, which now has a chain that he and I are both in the habit of using, because security habits can be built if you build them deliberately, if you choose them every day until they are as natural as the habits they replaced. He comes in and he sits at the table where Gerald sat, and he eats the food I make, and we talk about the week and about the Roman Empire, which I am still working through, and about his work and about the neighbors and about all the ordinary things that constitute a life that is by any reasonable measure a good one. I think about that night regularly, not with fear, with something more complex than fear, with the specific examined knowledge of someone who has looked at what frightened her and found that the frightening thing, while real, was not larger than her. The figure who walked into my hallway was real. The strategy they were part of was deliberate and serious and affected real people on a real street. All of that is true. And I am still in my house. Patricia is still at the end of the road. Arthur is still 4 doors down. The house that Gerald and I chose is still the house I live in, and the life that was built inside it is intact. I opened the door that night because I was half awake and unmindful, and I had not yet built the habit of the chain. I am not going to berate myself for that. I was a woman in her dressing gown at midnight who had heard a knock and was thinking about her son. I acted from the same instinct that has governed most of the decisions of my life, the instinct of someone who assumes good faith until there's a reason not to. The reason was there. I simply did not have the information to read it yet. I have the information now, and the information is this. The things we are most afraid of, the knock at midnight, the open door, the dark hallway, they are real, and they deserve to be taken seriously. But they are also, most of the time, not supernatural and not unconquerable. They are human. They were made by people with a motive and a method, and crucially, a calculation about what you would and would not do. The most important thing you can do in response to that calculation is make it wrong. My son said, "Don't open the door." He was right. I already had. And then we both did everything else correctly, and we are here. There is a line my father used to say, Gerald's father, a man from Shropshire who said few things, but said them with such weight that they have stayed with me for 40 years. He used to say, "The door you open in ignorance, you close in knowledge." It is not the opening that defines you. It is what you do once you know what came through. I know what came through. I know what it wanted. I know why it came. And I am in my house, at my table, with my son on Sundays and my Roman Empire on weeknights and the chain on the door, which I engage every time, which is now as natural as breathing, which is one of the small habits that constitute the very large fact of being safe in your own home. I am in my house, the door is closed, and I know exactly what is on the other side of it. If you are listening to this and there is something in your life that is knocking, something that has been creating a pattern you haven't yet named, a series of small, unsettling things that haven't yet assembled themselves into a picture you can act on, I want to say this to you. Start looking for the picture. Talk to your Owen. Find your Brendan. Document the things that seem too small to document, because the pattern is usually there before the evidence, and the evidence is usually there before the action, and the action is usually possible before the situation is as bad as it would become if no action was taken. You do not have to wait for the figure in the hallway. You can start at the pattern. And please, if you are getting value from these stories, if they are reaching you somewhere real, subscribe to this channel. It takes 1 second, and it means that stories like this one about ordinary people facing real things and finding their way through keep being told. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and leave me a comment. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me about the door you opened that you wish you had thought about longer. Tell me what you found on the other side. Tell me what you did next. I will be reading. I always am.